The town of Isiagu had seen many things: drought, flood, the occasional madness of harmattan winds that swept red dust through every crack and crevice of every home. But it had never seen anything quite like Adaeze Okonkwo. She was born on a Tuesday, which her grandmother, old Mama Chidima, said was the day the gods were in a generous mood. Too generous, as it turned out, because when Adaeze came into the world, she arrived with cheekbones carved like the hills of Enugu, skin the deep, warm color of fresh palm wine, and eyes so bright and full of light that the midwife, a stern, unimpressed woman who had delivered over 300 babies, actually stepped back and muttered a quiet prayer under her breath. Nay, this child is either blessed or cursed. Only time will tell which. By the time Adaeze was 22, time had given its answer. And the answer was both. She worked at Eze Pharmacy on the main road of Isiagu, counting tablets and labeling bottles and smiling patiently at old men who came in asking for blood pressure medicine, but somehow always lingered 40 minutes longer than necessary. She did not try to be beautiful. She wore her hair in a modest bun, tied her white coat tight, kept her eyes down when she walked through the market. It did not matter. Beauty, the real kind, is not something a person can fold up and tuck away like an old wrapper. It announces itself. It walks ahead of the person and arrives in a room first. The men of Isiagu had long since lost their reason over Adaeze Okonkwo. Chukwuemeka, the councillor's son, had sent 3 sets of wine-carrying relatives to her father's compound. Adaeze had refused. Wotini, the Yoruba contractor who had come to build the new government secretariat and decided to stay 4 years longer than the project required, had offered her a house in Abuja. She had refused. Even Pastor Unamdi, a man of God who wore a white collar and led Tuesday Bible study, had been caught by his wife writing Adaeze's name in the margins of his sermon notes, surrounded by small hearts that he had tried poorly to scratch out. The women of Isiagu watched all of this, and they did not feel sympathy. They felt fire. It started, as most cruelties do, with whispers. She uses something. She must be using something. No natural woman looks like that past 20. She has a mirror, I'm telling you, a blood mirror. My husband came home late again. He says he passed by the pharmacy. He says. Mama Rotunda, who owned the pepper stall closest to the pharmacy, and whose husband, Ifeanyi, had once been found standing outside Adaeze's window at 11 at night, claiming he was checking for mosquitoes, became the general of this quiet war. She was a large woman with a loud voice and a talent for making rumors sound like history. She gathered her council, 6 women who met under the guise of a prayer group every Thursday evening, and she laid out her case like a lawyer. That girl has scattered 3 homes on this street alone. My husband, Dikin Obi's husband, and that woman Ngozi, whose man now calls her Adaeze in his sleep. In his sleep! God, is this not witchcraft? The women agreed. The women always agreed. Something must be done, said Mrs. Uchenna, who sold fabric 2 streets over and had recently noticed that her son, a university boy home for the holidays, had taken to jogging past the pharmacy 6 times a day in a route that made no geographical sense. But carefully, said Mama Rotunda, stirring her cup of zobo slowly, very carefully. Adaeze, for her part, knew something was wrong, the way animals know rain before the clouds arrive. A feeling in the chest, a change in the air. She noticed that the women in the market who used to greet her with Adawa now turned their faces when she passed. She noticed that her landlady, Mama Kelechi, had started locking the compound gate by 8 p.m. sharp and always seemed to be watching from behind her curtain. She noticed the silence that fell over a group of women whenever she walked close, a silence with teeth in it. She mentioned it to her best friend, Somto Chukwu, who everyone called Somto, a loud and cheerful girl who worked at the bank and had the useful habit of knowing everything that happened in Isiagu before it officially happened. They sat in Adaze's small apartment, eating jollof rice from the same pot as they had done since secondary school, and Somto put down her spoon with the weight of a person about to say something serious. Ada, she said, these women are not just jealous. They are planning. Planning what? Somto hesitated. Outside, a generator coughed to life somewhere on the street. A goat complained loudly from a nearby compound. I overheard Mama Rotunda and Mrs. Uchenna at the salon on Saturday. They were talking about the water, the well behind the pharmacy. They mentioned a name, Baba Ubu. Adaeze felt the jollof rice turn to stone in her stomach. Everyone in Isiagu knew that name. Baba Ubu was not a doctor. He was not an herbalist in the cheerful root and leaf sense. He was something older and darker. A man who lived at the edge of the forest outside town, who people visited when they did not want to solve a problem. They wanted to end it. Somto. I know, Somto said quietly. She reached across and held Adaze's hand. I know. They sat in the warm yellow light of the apartment, while outside Isiagu moved and breathed and plotted, and the night pressed close against the windows like something waiting to be let in. Adaeze looked down at her own hands. Ordinary hands, she always thought. Hands that counted medicine and cooked stew and braided her little cousin's hair. And she thought, not for the first time, that she had been given a gift she had never asked for, wrapped in paper that looked, from the outside, exactly like a death sentence. She did not know yet how right she was. The plan was simple, as the most dangerous plans often are. Baba Ubu's compound sat at the edge of Isiagu, where the tarred road surrendered to red earth, and the red earth surrendered to bush. Mama Rotunda had gone on a Wednesday, market day, when movement was natural and no one questioned where a woman was going with a covered basket. She had gone alone, which told you something about the operation. Even among themselves, these women did not want witnesses. Baba Ubu was older than anyone could confidently calculate. His face had the quality of ancient leather, cracked, dark, and somehow permanent. He kept a compound of silence. No birds nested in his trees. The air around his home had a stillness that was not peaceful, but waiting. He listened to Mama Ubu without expression. She explained the situation. She mentioned Adaeze's name. Something shifted in his eyes. Not surprise, but recognition. As though beauty this potent had its own reputation that travelled ahead of the person. He went inside and came back with a small brown bottle sealed with black wax. It caught no light. Things that carry darkness rarely do. Put it in water, he said simply. She will not suffer. She will simply fade. Mama Rotunda paid him in cash and old currency notes, the kind that rustled like dry leaves, and walked home through the market with her basket covered and her face arranged into the expression of a woman who had been buying tomatoes. The pharmacy had a small staff kitchen in the back, a room with a kettle, a flask of water, and a shelf of mismatched cups that had accumulated over years like a family. Adaeze drank water from that flask every afternoon at exactly 2:30, between the lunchtime rush and the evening crowd. She was a creature of routine. The women knew this because Mama Rotonda's niece, Chisom, worked at the pharmacy as a cleaner. Chisom was 19 years old, unformed in the way that young people are when they have not yet decided who they want to be. She was not cruel by nature, but she was obedient by habit, and her aunt had a voice that made obedience feel like the only available option. She received the bottle on a Monday morning, passed through the gate of the pharmacy with it tucked into her bra, small and warm and terrible against her skin. Her instructions were clear. Wednesday, the flask, the afternoon. Tell no one. Chisom spent Monday and Tuesday in a state that looked like ordinary work, but was actually a kind of internal war. She swept the same corner 3 times. She dropped a bottle of cough syrup and stood staring at the broken glass on the floor for so long that Adaeze came out from behind the counter, crouched beside her and helped pick up the pieces herself. Chisom, are you well? You have not been yourself. Adeje's voice was gentle, without suspicion. Her eyes, those terrible, luminous, innocent eyes, looked at the girl with nothing in them but concern. Chisom felt something crack open in her chest. "I'm fine, Auntie Ada," she whispered. "I'm fine." She was not fine. Tuesday night, Chisom could not sleep. She lay on her mattress in the room she shared with 2 cousins and stared at the ceiling, while the ceiling stared back and said nothing useful. She thought about Adaeze crouching on the pharmacy floor, picking up glass with careful fingers. She thought about the small brown bottle. She thought about the word Baba Obu had used, fade, and how it was the most horrifying word she had ever heard, because it made death sound like something a person did quietly, apologetically, so as not to inconvenience anyone. She thought, Ada has never done anything to me. Ada has never done anything to anyone. She thought, beauty is not a crime. She thought, but I am afraid of my aunt. At 3 in the morning, she got up, took out her phone, and sent a text message to the one person she could think of who was both trustworthy and unafraid of Mama Rotonda. It was not an easy list. It contained exactly one name. Dr. Emeka Dike had grown up 3 streets from Adaeze and spent the better part of his teenage years pretending he hadn't. He was a physician now, newly returned from Lagos, where he had completed his residency, back in Isiagu, to set up a small clinic that his family kept telling him was financial suicide, and he kept telling his family was the whole point. He was tall, quiet in the particular way of people who think before speaking, and one of only a small number of men in Isiagu who had managed over the years to be in Adaje's presence without losing some essential piece of themselves. This was not because he was unaffected. It was because he was disciplined. He received Chisom's message at 3:15 a.m., read it twice, and sat up in bed with his heart doing something irregular in his chest. Mama Rotunda get something from Baba Obu. She say make I put am for Auntie Ada water. Wednesday afternoon. Doctor, please, I don't know wetin to do. Please, don't tell anybody, say na me tell you. He dressed in 4 minutes. He drove to the pharmacy, not because Adaje was there at 3 in the morning, but because he needed to do something with his hands and his body while his mind walked through the problem. He sat outside in his car in the dark, looking at the pharmacy shutters, thinking. He knew Mama Rotunda. He knew what she was capable of in the currency of rumor and social violence. He also knew that if he walked into the pharmacy Wednesday morning and announced the plot, Mama Rotunda would deny everything. Chisom would be destroyed for telling, and Adaje would be left exposed, warned but unprotected, living among people who had already decided she needed to be gone. A warning was not enough. He needed to be present. He needed to intercept.
he called Somto. Somto answered on the second ring, which told him she was also not asleep. I know, she said before he finished explaining. I've been worried for weeks. What do we do? Wednesday, he said. We need to be there Wednesday.
Wednesday arrived, wearing harmattan dust and bright, indifferent sunlight. Chisom came in to work with the bottle still in her bra and a face so tightly controlled it looked like a mask. She cleaned, she swept, she waited. At 12:30, while Adaeze was at the counter attending to a queue, Chisom slipped into the kitchen. She stood at the flask for a long moment. Her hand went to her chest. Then a voice came from behind her, low, calm, and unmistakably firm. Don't. She spun around. Dr. Emeka was leaning against the kitchen door frame in his white clinic coat, arms folded, watching her with eyes that were not angry but were absolutely certain. Chisom began to shake. The bottle fell from her hand and he crossed the room in 2 steps and caught it before it hit the floor, smooth and automatic as though he had rehearsed it. And perhaps in his mind, he had. Chisom collapsed against the kitchen wall and slid to the floor and put her face in her hands and wept the way very young people weep when they have been carrying something too heavy for their size, loudly, suddenly, with total abandon. Emeka stood with the bottle in his hand and looked at it. This small, dark, wax-sealed thing, and felt something cold move through him. It's okay, he told the girl on the floor, surprising himself with how steady his voice was. You did not do it. That is what matters. He did not tell Adaeze that day. He wanted to do it properly, not between customers, not in shock. He waited until closing time and walked with her to the small buka 3 streets away where they had both been buying pepper soup since university. And he sat across from her in the yellow light with the bottle locked in his car and told her everything. Adaeze listened without interruption. She was still for a very long time afterward. Then she said, quietly, I have been afraid of this. Not this exactly, but the shape of it. I know. They hit me for something I did not choose. I know. She looked out the window at the street where Isiagu was doing its evening things, motorcycles weaving, women balancing trays, children chasing each other through orange dust. The town that had known her all her life and had chosen, some of it, to want her dead. What do we do now? She asked. Emeka leaned forward. He had been thinking about this for 2 days. We don't run, he said. We don't hide. We make sure that what they try to do sees the light. All of it. Babaubu, the bottle, every woman in that prayer group. They will deny it. Chisom will not. Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. The pepper soup steamed between them, untouched. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not suspicious, genuinely asking. He took a breath. Outside, a motorcycle horn sounded. The evening crowd thickened and moved. Because, he said simply, someone should have done it a long time ago. That night, while Adaeze sat in her apartment with Somto's hand in hers and the weight of survival pressing quietly on her shoulders, Mama Rotunda sat in her own home, waiting for news that would not come. By morning, it would be she who received news instead. And in the forest at the edge of town, Baba Ogbu's compound sat in its unnatural silence. But even silence, as Isiago was about to learn, has a breaking point. As always before the story ends, Do tell us where you are watching from. I love to see how far these amazing stories travel. Also, thank you so much for the lovely comments on The Voice. I appreciate the feedback. Enjoy! The news moved through Isiagu the way fire moves through dry grass, low and fast and unstoppable. It started at the police station on Thursday morning when Dr. Emeka Dike walked in with a sealed evidence bag containing one small brown bottle, a written statement from Chisom Rotunda, signed, dated, and witnessed by a lawyer he had called from Enugu the previous evening, and a calm, unhurried manner that the officers at the front desk found deeply unsettling. Men who came to police stations in Isiagu usually came loud or came trembling. This one came like a man who had already decided how the story ended and was simply here to file the paperwork. Some too came with Adaeze. They sat in the waiting area side by side in the plastic chairs, some two's hand locked around Adaeze's like a boat. Adaeze wore no makeup, which she never did. She had on a plain blue dress and her hair was loose today. She had forgotten to tie it in the morning's confusion. And even in a police station, even under fluorescent lights that drained the color from everything, she was breathtaking. 2 officers forgot what they were doing when she walked in and had to be recalled to themselves by their desks. Adaeze noticed and felt, as she always did, the complicated exhaustion of being looked at. The arrest of Mrs. Ngozi Rotunda, known to all of Isiagu as Mama Rotunda, happened at 9:47 in the morning while she was frying akara outside her compound. This detail would later become central to how the story was told because there is something particularly undignified about being handcuffed while holding a frying ladle, and dignity for Mama Rotunda had always been everything. She did not go quietly. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, akara batter dripping from the ladle she still held. "Do you know my husband? Call Councillor Adeyemi. Call him now. This is a mistake. You hear me? A mistake." Her voice carried 3 streets in every direction. The market women stopped. The motorcycle riders slowed. Children peered from compounds. Isiagu pressed its face against the window of this moment and watched. Mrs. Uchenna was picked up from her fabric shop 20 minutes later. 2 other members of the Thursday prayer group were questioned at the station through the afternoon. Each of them, when presented with Chisom's detailed statement, experienced a rapid theological conversion from denial to confession that would have impressed Pastor Nnamdi, who was himself at home that day claiming illness, but was actually sitting very still in his parlor, praying that his name appeared in no document anywhere. It did not. He exhaled. He would spend the following 3 Sundays preaching on the subject of envy with a fervor that his congregation found unusually personal. Baba Obu was a more complicated matter. The police sent 2 officers to the edge of the forest that afternoon. They came back 2 hours later looking shaken and saying only that the compound had been vacated. This was the official word. The unofficial word, which spread through Isiagu by evening, was that when the officers arrived, the compound was empty in a way that felt recent. Warm ash in the fire pit, a cup of something still steaming on the table. But that there were no footprints leaving the compound in any direction. Isiagu decided collectively not to think too hard about this and moved on. The laboratory report came back from Enugu 6 days later. Dr. Emeka sat with Adaeze in his clinic, a clean, modest space that smelled of antiseptic and fresh paint, and read it to her in a steady voice. The bottle had contained a compound that the toxicologist described in language that was careful and clinical, and which, stripped of its careful clinical language, meant she would have been dead within a week. Adaeze received this information without tears. She had spent the week moving through a state that was beyond tears, a deep, clear stillness like water after a storm.
She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "A week." "Yes," Emeka said. "I would have drunk it on Wednesday, and by next Wednesday, I would have been gone." "Yes." She looked out his clinic window at the street. A woman was walking past with a baby tied to her back. A man was arguing cheerfully with a suya seller about the weight of his meat. Isiago, ordinary and alive. "I want to go home," she said. Not Isiago. He understood she meant something smaller. Her apartment, her kitchen, her own four walls. "I'll drive you," he said. The case went to court in Enugu and took 4 months to conclude, which in Nigerian legal time was considered remarkable speed and was largely due to the prosecutor assigned to the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Barrister Obiageli Nosu, who had the quality of a blade, thin, precise, and capable of considerable damage when properly applied. Mama Rotunda and Mrs. Uchenna were convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. The sentence was 3 years, which Barrister Nwosu described outside the courthouse as inadequate, and which Somto described less formally as rubbish. But it was something. It was a name on a charge sheet. It was a gavel coming down. It was Isiagu being made to look at what it had done and not allowed to look away. Chisom received a suspended sentence and community service, which the judge granted in recognition of her cooperation and her age and the particular kind of courage it takes to betray an aunt to save a woman you barely know. She wept through the entire ruling and afterwards stood outside the courthouse in the afternoon light, looking very young and very uncertain. Adaeze found her there and stood beside her for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Thank you." Chisom shook her head. "I almost didn't." "But you did," Adaeze said firmly. "You did." She did not hug the girl. She did not offer forgiveness in a grand gesture. She simply looked at her with those clear, direct eyes, and Chisom felt something settled in her that had been unsettled for months. She nodded. Adaeze nodded back. That was enough. The pharmacy was quiet when Adaeze returned to work on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the verdict. She unlocked the gate, turned on the lights, counted the morning stock, and stood behind the counter in her white coat with her hair in its usual bun. The first customer came in at 8:15. Old Baba Tunde with his blood pressure prescription, shuffling in with his walking stick and his usual 40-minute conversational agenda. "Adezenwa, you have returned." He beamed at her with genuine joy, the uncomplicated joy of an old man who simply liked her because she was kind and always remembered to ask after his daughter in Port Harcourt. "We were praying for you every morning, myself and my wife." "Thank you, Baba Tunde," she said, and smiled at him, a real smile, the kind she had been rationing for months. She counted his tablets and labeled his bottle and listened to 20 minutes about his daughter's new baby. And outside the pharmacy window, Isiagu moved and breathed and went about its business, and she was part of it and separate from it, and learning, slowly, how to hold both of those things at once. Emeka came by the pharmacy at 6:30 when she was locking up, which he had been doing every evening since the trial. Officially, to walk her to her car. Unofficially, because neither of them had yet found the words for what the unofficial reason was. They walked in the warm evening air. The harmattan had passed, and the air was softer now, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere to the north. Their arms were close, but not touching,
in the precise way of two people who are aware of exactly how much space exists between them. "How was the first day back?" he asked. "Long," she said. "Good. Mostly good." "Mostly?" She considered this honestly. "Someone stared at me this morning. A man I don't know. The usual staring." She paused, and for a moment I felt afraid. Not of him, just afraid. Like my body has learned to read staring as danger. Emeka was quiet. He understood this was not a problem he could solve with a drive to the police station and a signed document. "That will take time," he said carefully. "I know." She glanced at him sideways. "You stared at me too, when we were younger. Secondary school. You thought I didn't notice." He stopped walking. She stopped walking. They stood on the evening road with motorcycles weaving past them and the sun doing its slow orange business behind the rooftops. "I did," he admitted. He did not try to make it smaller than it was. "I was 17 and stupid, and you were..." He stopped. "What?" she said. And there was something in her voice that was careful but also curious, that was guarded but also open, in the way that only someone who has survived a thing can afford to be open. Because surviving it had taught her, among other things, that she was allowed to ask. He looked at her in the evening light. "You are the most extraordinary person I had ever seen," he said. "And I mean that in the way that has nothing to do with how you look. Though..." A breath. "That too. I'm not going to pretend." She laughed. It was the first time in months that she had laughed the way she used to laugh. Sudden and unguarded, from somewhere real. "At least you're honest," she said. "I've been trying," he said. They stood there for another moment. The evening held them. Then she started walking again, and after a half second, he fell into step beside her. And this time, the space between their arms closed by half, not quite touching, but almost, in the way of something that was not yet decided, but was already, quietly, inevitable. Isiagu would talk about the Adaeze Okonkwo case for years. It would become the story told to daughters by mothers, with different emphasis depending on the mother. Some told it as a warning against jealousy. Some told it as a lesson about beauty being both gift and burden. Some told it, the more honest ones, as an examination of what women do to each other when they mistake another woman's abundance for a theft from themselves. Adaeze let them talk. She had learned that she could not control what Isiagu did with her story, only what she did with her life. She expanded the pharmacy 2 years later. She hired 4 staff, including, after careful thought, Chisom Rotonda, who had returned to Isiagu after her community service, a quieter and more deliberate person, and who turned out to be, once given the chance, an excellent dispenser of both medicine and steady, unshowy kindness. She still wore her hair in a bun most mornings. She still walked through the market with her eyes forward. She still noticed when women turned their faces, and she still felt, on certain days, the complicated weight of being looked at. But on other days, most days now, she simply walked in the sunlight and let it fall on her face and decided, quietly and completely, that she was not going to apologize for taking up space in a world that had tried to make her disappear. She was Adaeze Okonkwo. She had been here before the hatred. She would be here after it. And she was, as old Mama Chidinma had said on the day she arrived, both blessed and cursed. She had simply finally learned which one was louder. Thank you for watching. See you on the next one.